On Boxing Day 2004, the second largest ever recorded earthquake struck 160 kilometers off the northwest coast of Sumatra, with a moment magnitude of 9.2 and lasting between 8 and 12 minutes at 7:58 in the morning, which was the longest duration of shaking ever observed. Primary waves traveled westward across the Indian Ocean, reaching speeds of up to 620 miles per hour, and waves managed to reach the coast of South Africa, which is 5,300 miles away. The resultant tsunami caused the largest death toll of 250,000, of which 167,000 from Indonesia, 35,000 from Sri Lanka, 18,000 from India, 8,000 from Thailand, and 543 Swedish tourists in Indonesia and Thailand were also killed, alongside a dozen other African and Asian countries which were impacted. Furthermore, millions were displaced by the tsunami, and it was declared the worst natural disaster in recorded history since an eruption in 1912, as well as being acknowledged as the deadliest tsunami ever recorded.
The earthquake occurred at 2 minutes to 8 am local time due to the Indo-Australian plate being subducted below the Burma microplate, a subplate of the Eurasian plate. The subsequent vertical upthrust of up to 10 metres of the Eurasian plate in some places displaced trillions of tonnes of water. Energy was released in the form of primary, secondary and surface waves that led to a moment magnitude of 9.3. with the fault rupturing at 2 km a second away from the epicentre for 1,300 km indicated by aftershock readings. This subsequently led to the generation of a large tsunami. The tsunami was 15 to 20 metres at its maximum height, given the offshore topography. It inundated 3 to 4.5 km inland in flatter areas in Sumatra and Banda Aceh.
This is Michael Dobbs of the Washington Post.
Disaster struck with no warning at a faultless clear blue sky. I was taking my morning swim around the island when I heard my brother shouting at me, "Come back! Come back! There's something strange happening with the sea!" As I swam to the shore, my mind was momentarily befuddled by two conflicting impressions: the idyllic blue sky and the rapidly rising waters. In less than a minute, the sea level had risen at least 15 foot, but the sea itself remained calm, barely a wave in sight. The reports of hundreds, perhaps thousands of people missing, drowned in southern Sri Lanka. The coastal road is littered with carcasses, boats and even dead dogs. Even a few dead sharks are washed up on the road. We have no water and no electricity. We are practically cut off from the rest of Sri Lanka, the holiday we planned and dreamed about. It's ruined. We feel fortunate to be alive.
The Sumatra tsunami in 2004 affected 14 countries, and more than 230,000 people lost their lives. Socially, Indonesia, the north and west coast of Sumatra, and smaller islands west of Sumatra were most seriously affected by the earthquake and tsunami. The Sumatran National Disaster Relief Coordination Agency stated over 126,000 Indonesians died, and 37,000 were missing. Furthermore, the Aceh province suffered 31,000 casualties alone. However, the World Health Organization stated the number of deaths from diseases such as cholera and typhoid in refugee camps could rival the death toll from the tsunami itself, showing secondary implications could be equally damaging to the tsunami itself. The Sumatra region was closest to the epicenter and rupture, so people were impacted first by the quake. Despite this, the natives were very aware of tsunami hazards due to the remembrance of the earthquake and tsunami in 1907, killing 2,000 people. As a result, annual practice drills have been carried out ever since. Due to these drills, the island of Simuel, located 40 kilometers from the epicenter, suffered only 7 deaths. Thailand suffered considerably less in terms of loss in life and structural damage compared to Indonesia. The government reported 4,812 deaths and 4,499 people missing after the tsunami, with the deaths of 3,950 coming from the most popular tourist resort, Phuket. Unfortunately, the death toll was so high here because the tsunami struck at 9:55 in the morning, and hundreds of tourists were on the beaches. Furthermore, December was the peak tourist season, and 2,248 foreign nationals died from 37 countries. However, tourism was also a fundamental source of income for every single nation impacted, and the economies of each nation became at risk of becoming unstable. Thailand's infrastructural damage cost was estimated at $1 billion US. An estimated 100,000 people lost jobs. In addition, Phang Nga had the greatest level of residential area affected in Thailand, with 52% of homes destroyed, equating to 12,815 households. Tourism was the largest income generator for locals, contributing to 6% of the GDP in 2002. As a result, any drop in tourist activity would heavily influence the country's financial stability for the future. This was amplified due to the global media coverage, and so the effects of tourism were increased due to people being made aware of the disaster on a global scale. As a result, this affected their bookings made to all the countries who were impacted by the disaster. The combination of economies' losses and the total infrastructural cost equated to a combined total of $2,198 million US, or 1.4% of Thailand's GDP.
There are a number of environmental impacts that affect a number of ecosystems due to the 2004 tsunami. During the tsunami, hazardous materials and sewage mixed with ordinary debris as pipes and storage facilities were damaged. This led to severe pollution of soils and groundwater after the tsunami had occurred, so growing food was impossible, as well as the problems regarding feeding livestock and the population. Contaminated groundwater also meant little drinking water was available for refugees, increasing the impact socially and increasing the death rate. The tsunami also caused salination of groundwater, rivers, lakes and wells, meaning that soil lost its fertility and rivers and lakes lost biodiversity, as the freshwater fish and other freshwater organisms can't survive in salty water. Indonesia's statements of National Development Planning's damage assessment estimates that 20% of sea grass beds, 30% of coral reefs, 30% of wetlands and 50% of sandy beaches on the west coast were damaged due to the tsunami. In some local areas, 90% of damage was reported to mangroves and coastal forests. In Thailand, 50% of the coral reefs were affected by the tsunami, primarily due to the siltation and sand infiltration. This led to the loss of biodiversity in this region, with many areas taking a significant time to recover due to the fragile ecosystems and the loss of certain species. Material can be transported back from land to sea. This material can be heavy in nutrients and trace elements that lead to phytoplankton blooms and increasing populations of secondary consumers, leading to an imbalance on the local food chains. There are also a number of political impacts that affected the area during and after the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami. In Sri Lanka and in Indonesia, there were multiple civil wars occurring, so aid was hard to distribute by governmental forces. This meant the rebels helped with aid in some communities. This led to the development of extremism due to the rebels aiding individuals only if they joined their cause in return, thus leading to growing opposition to central government. However, the tsunami ultimately helped bring peace to the regions as people laid down their arms and helped in relief effort to save people and communities. Yet fighting broke out again in Sri Lanka a year later with the Tigers military group and governmental forces, with people affected by the tsunami caught up in the middle of it, meaning recovery slowed for the nation. Myanmar lied about the amount of people who actually died as a result of the tsunami in the country that day. The military reported only 90 people died as a result of the tsunami. However, a reporter from Asian News, who was in the town of Rangon, Thailand, just a few kilometers from the border, said that there could be as many as 600 deaths in the region. When the reporter spoke to the local people, they said many more had died, especially on the Mergu archipelago on Myanmar's south coast. The military has been deployed in the region and did not allow damages to be spoke of and restricted movement, thus showing the impact of a dictatorship government and fragile states can have on determining the impact. To counter this, the US supplied $250 million worth of support to the region by the United States military.
Boxing Day tsunami 2004 caught a large proportion of the affected areas by surprise, even though the time between the earthquake and the tsunami was several hours for areas such as Sri Lanka and the Maldives. This was due to the limited access to early warning systems in the area of the Indian Ocean. Tsunami warning systems cost in excess of the millions, with detection becoming increasingly difficult due to the nature of tsunamis being near on undetectable in deep ocean. This is because there is a lack of friction in deep water, leading to an increased velocity of up to 800 kilometers an hour, but a decrease in height, meaning the wave often associated with tsunamis is easily unnoticed. One simple method used, but gives little time for reaction, is the possible temporal withdrawal of the seafront into the ocean before the tsunami hits. This gives a few minutes for those in the immediate vicinity of the ocean to retreat to higher ground, thus saving lives. Since the event, a tsunami warning system has been installed in the Indian Ocean, costing $20 million. However, this reaction to a known hazard has come too late for many, with authorities needing the tragic events of 2004 to highlight the need for establishing a tsunami warning system similar to that used successfully on many occasions in the Pacific. Nevertheless, several positives were present from the response of many NGOs. An average of 10 to 14 billion US dollars was raised internationally, the equivalent of $7,000 per affected person. This global response shows the key importance of international aid in the recovery of affected areas. This is both in the short term, with supplies to refugees and the recovery of the country's basic infrastructure, and the long term to re-establishing social, economic, environmental and political capabilities. However, the single-phase focus of many NGOs perhaps decreases the efficiency of the response, with 91% of those interviewed in Indonesia stating they had been rescued by individuals, not groups. This demonstrates that disaster response does not necessarily have to come from disaster management organisations, with the first line of effective call often being the local populace.
Compared to the coastal population of the Indian Ocean, the Japanese had very little time to react to the impending wave that was heading their way. The Indian Ocean tsunami hit the Sumatra coastline several hours after the initial earthquake, while the tsunami that hit Japan made impact only half an hour after. However, since Japan is one of the richest countries in the world, with a GDP at the time of $5.9 trillion and experienced on average 1,500 earthquakes per year, it had invested heavily into many disaster management methods, spending about $20 million per year to maintain and improve these methods. These include stringent building regulations, state-of-the-art warning systems, rigorous education, and widespread sea defences. Although, countless sea defences were subdued by the wave, including the 18-foot seawall in Kamachi City, the world's deepest and largest. The wave spread as far as 6 miles inland and caused about 95% of all the damage and devastation experienced. But without these methods in place, the potential loss of life from both the earthquake and tsunami would have been far greater. Indonesia has a much smaller economy than Japan, and at the time of the Indian Ocean tsunami, had a GDP of $256.8 billion, 23 times less than Japan's. This meant that they had not invested heavily in disaster management methods, and subsequently left hundreds of thousands of people vulnerable to the tsunami. A lack of education was highlighted when the sea began to draw back from the coast as the tsunami was approaching. The people who were witnessing this were more intrigued by it than in fear of it, so by the time they realized what was happening, for many it was too late and they were caught and swept by the onrushing wave. Japan was also quickly able to recover and rebuild, and those affected in the space could be properly looked after. However, in Indonesia, little was done to rescue those who were still in danger, and lack of support for those that were displaced meant spread of disease, dehydration, and malnutrition led to many more deaths beyond this event. However, many power plants and electrical stations were subsequently damaged by the tsunami in Japan. The most serious cause for concern came when the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant was damaged, leading to explosions of the reactors and leaking of radiation, which put millions of lives worldwide at risk. These sort of damages weren't experienced in Indonesia. However, due to a lack of resources, many are still feeling the effects more than 11 years after the tsunami.